Good morning, everyone. It is 11 o'clock, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I thank you all for being here. Just quickly making sure, can you guys both hear me and see my screen?
Yes.
I see a thumbs up. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. All right, I think we are good to get started then. So, for anybody who is not as familiar with Paragus, we are an employee-owned company specializing in providing outsourced IT to other organizations. We serve organizations throughout New England, ranging in size from as few as 5 employees up to about 1,500 employees. And let's talk about kind of why we're here today and what it is we're going to cover. So I put together an agenda that you can see here on the screen. We'll do a quick look at kind of the state of AI, where is it, and kind of what are some of the projections, especially for 2025. I'm going to do an overview of what ChatGPT is, talk about what it excels at, where it falls short, some limitations you should be considering, talk about the differences among the different versions of ChatGPT, some of the newest features and enhancements, some tips and tricks for the best prompt engineering, and then we'll do kind of a live demo. And most importantly, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. If anybody has questions about what I'm presenting as I'm going through it, by all means, please feel free to raise your hand, unmute, or post in the chat. Otherwise, there'll be time at the end where you can ask questions directly. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start us off. So quick state of artificial intelligence, and I apologize, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly, but I want to make sure that you just have some context for kind of where we're at. So these are kind of the three ways that we think about the evolution of AI. There's other models, but we find this to be the most popular version. And so where we are today is still in this narrow AI, what we often refer to as kind of basically machine learning. It's able to take patterns and produce results based on a set of data, but still in a narrow subset. The big giant question in the world is when are we going to reach what is considered general intelligence? And that's often thought of as AI being as intelligent as humans. Now, obviously, that's a lot more of complex, there's a lot more complexity to that, but that's an easy way to think about it. And then there's this theoretical version of AI, which is super intelligence. That is this idea that AI could someday be smarter than human beings. That's still kind of in the realm of theoretical. Mostly what we're focused on right now is the space in between narrow AI and general AI, and when are we going to get there? Ray Kurzweil, who's very adept at making very smart technology predictions, is suggesting that we will likely be here by the end of this decade. And then you've got other people who believe that we could be there by as early as the end of this year. Regardless, though, it is coming. But where are we right now? So I've got a couple of slides just to show the intelligence of AI and kind of what we're seeing. This shows you some common exams, and this is a little bit of an older slide. But what you can see is the blue bar represents ChatGPT 3.5, and the orangish pinkish bar represents ChatGPT 4. So for example, this shows you how it evolved. The original ChatGPT 3.5 was useless at the bar exam. It could barely pass 10% compared to human test takers. But with the invention of ChatGPT 4, that went way up, and it's now competing with about 90% of human test takers. Contrast that to like some of the other tests, AP Psychology, and ChatGPT 3.5 was perfectly sufficient to pass that test. So this speaks a little bit to how ChatGPT's evolved and how it's not just getting faster and better, its use case is changing and it's able to do different types of things. And we'll talk more about that when we get into the different versions of ChatGPT. This is a much more recent slide, and this shows you the different AI models competing in an IQ test. Claude 3 is now kind of the highest, most intelligence version. Now, that doesn't mean that Claude is better than ChatGPT. There's certain things that it doesn't do well, but purely from a logic and reasoning standpoint, Claude got the highest IQ score. It got 18 and a half questions out of 35. And this just shows you in comparison to like just a random guesser. So if random guessing gets you 50% right, then this shows you kind of how these other AI models are competing. This is a slide we've shown before, but this talks about using AI to do things like cancer diagnosis. So in this particular model, they trained AI on a huge data set and then had it compete against neurologists. And the AI correctly diagnosed 85% of cancer cases in 18 minutes, whereas the neurologist, it took them 50 minutes and they only got a 64% accuracy. What's impressive, though, is they then redid the test. And when they redid it the second time, the AI scored even higher and did it in less time. And that just shows the speed and power that AI can learn, which is maybe one of its most impressive qualities. We've shown this one before, too, but this one always scares me. They had patients go into an fMRI machine, think about these images, and then had the AI read their brain scan and figure out what they were thinking about. And the AI came back with these images, spookily able to capture what was going on inside the person's brain as they were looking at the images.
That's crazy.
And this is an updated slide that just talks about AI being used for media creation. In this particular case, looking at making movies. And I'll show you a clip here.
This is the future of visual storytelling. LTX Studio gives form to your ideas, bringing them to life. Just a handful of words can transform your concept into a story. Weave it into a compelling narrative.
Can we make it a regular courtroom drama set in New York City?
Sure. Then generate to elevate it into a grand production with music, dialogue, and sound effects.
Stop. Yeah, I like it. But can the car be red?
You got it.
You're gonna hate me, but can we try it with a guy?
No problem.
Actually, let's go back to a girl.
Okay.
How about storyboarding?
No problemo.
We need an extra scene here.
Simple.
So, I have some ideas about casting.
Okay.
Can we talk lighting?
Sure.
Does this thing do titles?
How's this? Whatever your creative wishes, LTX Studio harnesses the power of AI and gives you the ability to supercharge the creative production process. From camera angles to casting, through styling and contextual editing, LTX is a holistic movie maker for all. LTX Studio. Join the waitlist today.
Now, you can imagine why the unions in Hollywood are very concerned about the impact of AI on the kind of TV and movie industries. Tools like this are going to dramatically change the way that we create content, the way that we create media, video, imagery, audio. And some of the newest technologies are actually audio was kind of the one that wasn't as touched. And now some of the biggest breakthroughs in 2024 were audio AI companies that were very good at creating sound effects and background music and background noise to match what was happening in a scene. So you can see that there's a lot of cool things happening on the software side. And then the last piece on the kind of state of AI is the bringing the AI into a physical manifestation. And so that's where we look at kind of the confluence of AI and robotics. And I'm just going to introduce you to one particular humanoid robot that I think is a good example of kind of where we're at. as you can see, if you look at kind of the market that Figure 2.0 is targeted at, physical labor is still about 50% of the global GDP at about $40 trillion a year. If you look at the ability to displace that, or even just have a small impact on it, you could have a significant impact on real jobs. And there are these predictions, and predictions are predictions, like, take them with a grain of salt. But there's this prediction that we could have as much as an 84 million job shortage just in physical labor alone, the kind of work that could be done by a robot like Figure 2.0. So just again here, the point isn't to necessarily go deep into any one topic. I just want to give you a 30,000-foot overview of kind of where this technology stands. But now we'll kind of bring it back in. The good news is that at least for today, we don't need to worry too much about robotics. We're not worried about some of these kind of more advanced technologies. We don't think it's going to compete with you today, kind of in taking over your job. Really, what we're focused on for the rest of today is looking at how can AI help you do your job? And that's always, I believe, kind of the most appropriate and effective way to think about where AI is today. Don't look at it as something that is a threat to your organization, to your job, as much as it's a way to help you, your staff, your team be more efficient, more effective, get more work done. And that's really what we want to work on for the rest of today. So changing gears a little bit, I just want to give you a quick overview of OpenAI. OpenAI is the company who created ChatGPT. ChatGPT is an AI-powered large language model that generates human-like text based on context and also past conversations. And it matters because it can save you a lot of time by automating drafting, research, assistance with certain tasks, summarization, brainstorming, and quite a bit more. So on the one hand, when you're working with tools like this, they can feel incredibly smart. They can seem almost overwhelming at how intelligent they are. And that's great because you can harness that kind of perception to do a lot of great work for you and to make your life easier. On the other hand, as I've shown people before, there's a lot of things it still can't do. And this kind of brings us back to reality of like, while we believe there's great advancements coming, and I think we can see how these pieces come together, the good news is that we're not quite there yet. And just as a funny example, if I was to ask ChatGPT how many states start with the same state capital, you'll get a different answer every time. When I asked it this time, I got 8. Some ones that made sense, and then some ones that didn't make sense, like Florida, Tallahassee, Idaho, Boise, Alaska, Juneau, and Utah, Salt Lake City. So then I said, are you sure? And ChatGPT came back and said, no, there's actually 4. Here they are. And then I could have taken that answer, but I said, just for fun, are there any others? And then it added in, oh yeah, Texas, Austin. So it just shows you like it's a guessing software. It is generative text. It's autocomplete on your phone or on your Google search. It's just trying to guess what comes next. That's different than critical thinking, logic, and reasoning. However, as when we get into the versions of ChatGPT, the newest version of ChatGPT has tremendous logic reasoning capabilities. And so it really has now traversed into another quartile. And if I was to repeat this exercise with that version of ChatGPT, it would ace it more times than it wouldn't. It would occasionally still get it wrong just because of the way the language model works, but it's going to be much, much more accurate on a question like this that involves logic and reasoning. So more background, ChatGPT was first launched in 2018. And then it kind of took off from there. And we saw ChatGPT 1 become 2, 3 went beta, and 3 was released. This is when we really started talking about ChatGPT, and it got a ton of hype and a lot of publicity. Then they a couple of years later released 3.5. And shortly after that, published ChatGPT 4. 4 was then replaced with Turbo, which was just a faster version of 4. And now we have 4.0, which is the current version. And that's what we'll be looking at. And that came out in May of this year, last year. So let's just take a look at some of the top use cases for using a tool like ChatGPT, especially today. So first, I would say content creation and drafting. So things like blog posts, writing emails, marketing copy, social media captions, webinar content, things like that, ChatGPT is very adept at doing. It's also good, and people don't always think of it like this, but it's good for brainstorming and idea generation. So if you're trying to name a product, generating topics for meeting conversations, finding creative angles, brainstorming, meeting agendas. Those are the types of things that it's actually quite good at, and I'd encourage you to try that out if you haven't. It's also great at summarization and research assistance. So let's say that there's a very long website or a white paper or even a video that you would like to have summarized for you. You can provide ChatGPT the link to that video, that content, and ask it to read it and summarize it for you. And this is a newer feature that maybe not as many people are aware of, because it used to be ChatGPT was a closed system. You couldn't ask it to go to the web and look at an article or read a blog or watch a video, but that has changed. So you now are able to direct ChatGPT outside of its closed language model and access information that is current and relevant. And we'll talk about later kind of what the impact of that can be and how you can benefit from that. It's also great at generating code. If you guys are trying to make a new website, if you're trying to understand what code is doing, write a PowerShell, do Java, it's great at those types of tasks. And then it's great at language translation and also grammar checking. That's another thing that people don't always think of it for. But let's say you've written an article and you want to translate it to Spanish, or you have an article that somebody shared with you that's in a different language that you want to translate back to English. It's very good at doing language translation and doing it in a way that is a lot better than like the old school Google Translate that we probably have all used, where it's kind of a mess. This is going to be a much more natural translation that's going to be able to give you a more accurate output. What's important to keep in mind, though, is ChatGPT is great as an input tool, as a first draft tool, as giving you guidance, direction, but you got to be careful not to think of it as a final authority on anything. If it does a translation, you may still need to fact check it. If you're trying to summarize content, you still need to kind of take that in and review it and make sure that it's right. It's great at giving you assistance, but it is not something that you can just totally delegate to and be hands-off and not have to question it, review it, proofread it, etc. There's been a lot of really hilarious times when people sent an email or wrote a paper that was written by ChatGPT that clearly was not reviewed and still had some pretty big mistakes or issues with it. So where does ChatGPT fall short? Where should we kind of be careful with it? So one thing we've got to remember, and I'll get into this more in a minute, but it doesn't have the most up-to-date accurate information, especially not unless you ask it to go get something that's more current. So by default, the different models have different cutoff dates to what it knows, and I'll talk more about that. But for real-time data and live updates, you've got to be very, very careful. It's not going to have deep subject matter expertise. So it can produce very convincing answers, but sometimes it's equally convincing and wrong at the same time. And so it's very good at sounding smart, but that doesn't mean that it always is smart. There was some really funny examples that got passed around of it writing a physics paper that sounded brilliant, but when reviewed by an actual physicist who knew what they were talking about, the whole paper was complete gobbledygook. And so that's where you do need to be somewhat sensitive and careful and make sure that you're able to provide that final review. Its factual accuracy is going to be confusing. It can do what's called hallucinating, which is the AI term for getting something wrong. And so basically, it has all this information. It looks at that information. It looks at what you're trying to ask it, and it does its best to fill in the blank. Occasionally, what it's going to see is not actual reality. I was using it the other day to provide draft content on an RFP submission, and it read a question totally wrong, provided a very intelligent answer that looked great, but if I had not read it with a fine-tooth comb, it would have completely missed the mark. And then it's not yet in a highly specialized world. So if you're trying to get specific information about permitting for a town, a municipality, on a specific industry around what are the compliance regulations, it's not quite a deep specialized expert. And so when it comes to things like legal and medical advice, it's really not quite there. And I would not look at it as a replacement for some more powerful tools or for actually consulting experts themselves. Some other key limitations that we want to think about are knowing what model we're on, kind of what the date is. So if you're using ChatGPT 3, the cutoff date was June of 2020. 3.5 then moved that to September 21. And then ChatGPT 4, the cutoff date is October 2023. As I mentioned, when we work with these tools, we can direct them to go get newer information, but it's not going to be the same. It can summarize that information, but it can't include it in its reasoning. And I'll kind of show you an example of that when we get into it. But it's great at saying, hey, summarize this brand new website that just got published. It can do that. But if you ask it a question where you want it to rely on the information on that website, it's not going to be as robust because that information is not in its data set. It's just being asked to include it as kind of supplemental material. And that can work, but sometimes it backfires a little bit. It does still have a potential for bias. You have to remember it was trained on the internet. The internet is not necessarily the place that we think of for equality, diversity, equal representation, fair and ethical information. So it is important, and this is why some states have done things like ban ChatGPT from viewing job applications, reviewing promotion opportunities. You want to be careful that if there's an opportunity for bias in the task you're asking it to do, I would highly, highly caution you from doing that, because there is a lot of bias in the tool, and that bias is not bias that's going to be easy to pull out because it's just inherent in the data set that it's trained on. And so we want to be careful there. Similarly, we want to be careful with privacy. Unless you're using a certain version of ChatGPT that protects the data, you putting data into ChatGPT opens up the opportunity that you could be introducing data into the large language model that is used for other people. The most famous example of this was when a Samsung employee was asking for help with a patent application they were filing on a brand new smartphone. They asked ChatGPT to help, but then ChatGPT now had that smartphone application and it was found by somebody else and created kind of a fun little situation. The other one is ethical guidelines. It's really important to understand where misinformation and bias could really harm somebody, and making sure that those are the last things that you're using a tool like ChatGPT for. And then finally, you need to comply with data privacy policies. More and more data privacy policies are actually specifying that this data cannot be used in a ChatGPT or OpenAI or large language model. You need to be very sensitive to that and careful, especially if you're dealing with regulated information. So for example, even if you're using the paid version that has privacy, the data you're using may have restrictions on it, or the vendor, your customer, may have restrictions that says you cannot use my data in any kind of a language model. That's a newer thing, but we're starting to see companies and contracts that have that language in them. All right, so let's talk about the different ChatGPT model versions just for a second. I'll start kind of backwards. The models that you guys really need to probably think about right now are really just OI, GTP 4.0, and 4.0 mini. Those are really the three that are prevalent today. So let's start with OI. I'm sorry, O1. Introduced in September of 2024, O1 is designed to handle complex reasoning tasks, particularly excelling in things like mathematics, coding, and scientific inquiries. It achieves this by generating longer internal chains of thought before responding, leading to more accurate and logical outputs. However, that means that it is going to operate at a slower pace, and it does incur some higher costs. It also can't handle attachments and multimedia the way that 4.0 can. And we can look at that more when we get to the demo. One of the things that's really cool about O1 is when you're using it, what you'll notice is you'll put your prompt in and you'll hit submit. And it'll say this thing called like thinking and then reformatting and then analyzing. What it's actually doing is before it responds, it's actually analyzing your prompt itself and rewriting your prompt based on everything it knows about prompting science to then give the tool a better output by giving it a better prompt in the first place. So it's this kind of very powerful tool that is actually doing prompt engineering for you to improve the quality of your prompting, and then using some advanced reasoning. And this is where you can start to bring in more analytical, complex, critical thinking type tasks, because it is a more powerful model that it is using. ChatGPT 4.0 is still probably by far the most popular tool. It was released in May of 2024, and it's a multimodal model capable of processing and generating text as well as images and audio. It offers faster response times and it's more cost effective, making it suitable for tasks that involve things like textual understanding, creative writing, and multimedia content. It also has internet browsing capabilities, like I was mentioning earlier, and it can enhance its utility for accessing up-to-date information. So by using these tools, we can bring in fresh information beyond that cutoff date of the knowledge base. And then you've got 4.0 Mini, which is a streamlined version of ChatGPT 4.0, and it's designed for efficiency and cost effectiveness. Its compact size and reduced computational requirements make it ideal for applications like on-device AI. So if you want to put AI inside of a device and the application is going to do the processing there, this version works better for that. Rapid prototyping, resource-constrained environments where you don't have as much computational power, and real-time applications where you're actually going to be doing something like having a chatbot or virtual assistant where the immediate feedback is essential. It's great for those types of tasks. So one thing that's kind of cool is we talk about some of the latest features in ChatGPT. It can now see, hear, and talk. And some of this does require you to use the mobile app, but you can do things like take a video with your phone and ask it to analyze it, to give you feedback, to summarize what it sees. You can talk to it and have a conversation. It will engage with you. You can ask it how it's doing. You can literally like engage in a very long dialogue with back and forth, but you can also just give it instructions like, could you help me think about a way to prepare for this meeting that I have coming up? Here's what I'm worried about. And it can kind of engage with you in some back and forth dialogue to help you create the content, the vision, the direction, the inspiration, the ideas that you're looking for. And it talks back. Some of the cooler stuff is it can help with job application assistance. So this has been leveraged to do things like craft cover letters and resumes. It can improve job search outcomes by customizing the cover letter to the job application and really make the candidate feel much more personalized, that they're not sending out some generic letter to everybody. It's also really good at interview prep. So you could ask ChatGPT to help you prep for an interview. You could give it the website of the company, the job description, and it's going to tell you likely questions you're probably going to get, good information to bring up, questions that you might want to ask the interviewee, and other types of things that are just going to help you as somebody who's an applicant be much more prepared for that interview. Another one that people don't always think of is travel planning. If you know you're going to a new city and you're going on a trip, you could ask it to make you a full itinerary. Say, we're going to be there for 4 days. We want to stay in this area. We don't want to do more than 2 activities a day. We really like this kind of food, et cetera, et cetera. And then ask it to make you a full itinerary for your trip. And it can do that with quite a great deal of detail and accuracy. On the educational side, certainly we've all probably heard and seen it being used by students to create essays, help them understand topics, help with things like homework. But it's also now starting to be used as a tutor where you can do things like, hey, I'm having a hard time understanding this concept. Can you help explain it to me? And it can give you a reasoning and then you can respond, I still don't get it. And it can try again. It can be that tutor for your student in math to really help them get a concept that maybe they're struggling to comprehend. And what's great about the way that it works now is the more you use it, the more it learns. And so if it figures out how you learn, how information is received by you, then in the future, the more you use it, the more accurate, the more likely it's going to be able to help you, your student, whoever it is that's using it as a tutor. Certainly content creation, we've already talked quite a bit about, but maybe you haven't thought about using it for a sound bite, for background noise, for things like that. And then one of the cooler things that you may or may not have seen yet is it now has the ability to interact with Canvas. If you're not familiar with Canvas, Canvas is a tool that can do everything from creating flyers and PowerPoint presentations. It can do coding. It's like basically a content creation platform with different tools to add colors and images and text and move things around. So ChatGPT is now fully integrated with Canvas, and you can pull up Canvas to say, help me create a flyer for this. And it can do that. And then you can move this image around, change this out, do that. And then you can export it into a PDF, into an image file. It's great for really long, complex documents because now you're editing like in a word processor, as opposed to just editing in the prompt itself. And so you can like highlight sections and say, rewrite this section. You can say, add more information here, make this longer. It's much more interactive. almost as if you had asked your assistant to go give you a draft, and then the two of you sat down with a red line and you kind of made circles and comments and edits. It's a little bit like that, where you're interacting with the tool. And that can be a really powerful way to take something like a complex document and get to the end result faster. Whereas a lot of people, I think, are still satisfied with just taking that first draft, putting it into Microsoft Word, and then doing the work themselves for the next 4 hours to make it right. You can now stay with ChatGPT longer, where it can really work with you until the finish line, until you have a final product. There's also this new tool called Project, which enables users to group files and chats for use. So you can say, for example, let's say you've got a big conference coming up in 6 months from now, and throughout the process, you're going to be coming back and forth to ChatGPT to create invitations, to provide content for social media, to help with informational instructions, keynote speeches. You're going to be working with it a lot. You can create a project in ChatGPT for that conference. And then as you go back to that project and ask it for more things, it'll continue to keep all the context of the other things you've asked it for together, and know that, okay, if you're asking me, it's in relation to this project, and I'm going to bring what I know about this project from what you've shared with me to the response that I give you. And in this case, the ChatGPT is giving you. You can now do video screen share and voice chats. This gives you the ability to do real-time video screen sharing and image upload capabilities. This can make it, it's all in the mobile app, but it makes it easier to say, like, hey, take a look at this. What am I missing? Can you help me figure this out? Can you make this designed better? And then we talked a little bit about Canvas already. So now let's get into prompt engineering. And what we'll do is, in addition to sending out the recording of this webinar, I'm going to send you 2 cheat sheets that summarize some of what I'm about to share with you. And will just help you kind of have as handy guides that you can refer to when you'd like to go back to this topic. But I'm going to start with what I consider to be the perfect prompt. There's a lot of different models. There's a lot of different approaches. This is what I have found to be the most effective tool at prompting ChatGPT that's easy to understand and comprehend for people who are not experts at this already. So think of it as context, task, instruction, clarity, refine. And so I'll walk you through what I mean by that. So we're going to start with context. Define the background information or setup provided in the prompt to help the AI understand the subject or the situation. For example, you're a travel agent helping someone plan a trip to Europe on a budget, or I'm writing a blog post about cybersecurity for small business. You want to make sure you're giving ChatGPT context for what it is you're about to ask it to do. If I just jump in and skip ahead to the task without giving it the context, I'm going to get something that feels more generic. It's not going to be as contextualized to the topic or the subject or the person or the persona that I'm trying to bring in. So then we get to the actual task. So the task is going to be, and this content is not quite right. But the task is going to be, what is the actual thing that you're asking it to do? What is the actual to not say task again, the actual outcome? I need to know, where do I go for this? I need to know what this is. I need an email written with this information in it. And then you're going to go into instructions. So this is how you tell it, how do you want it to do that task? So I've told it I'm going to Europe. I've asked it for an itinerary, but now I need to tell it a little bit more about that task. I want the itinerary written as a list, including cities, activities, and costs. Or I want, in my task of writing this blog post, I want you to explain the differences in simple terms for a non-technical audience. Think of this as if you were giving instructions to somebody to do. You'd say, hey, I need you to do this. When you're doing it, make sure you do it this way, or make sure you don't do this, or make sure that you keep this in mind. It really is the detailed instructions that accompany the task that provide a little bit more information. And then there's the clarify. So this is where you're going to provide additional input to address ambiguities. So for example, you might ask ChatGPT, what's the budget range for this trip? Or should cybersecurity tips focus on software solutions or employee training? These are the kind of things you want to be thinking about, and then provide that to it. So for example, I could say, you're a travel agent, make me an itinerary, make it in the form of a list, but I only have a budget of $500. Or it's really important that for the cybersecurity training, I only want to focus on software solutions. This is the additional kind of boundaries or limitations you're placing on the task that you're about to ask it to do that are going to give you a better result. And then finally, refine. So you're going to get a response, and then you're going to refine that by saying something like, could you expand on the 3D activity? Or could you make it a blog post sound more professional and concise? What I find a lot of people do is they get the output they like, and then they get the output and they don't like it, or they kind of like it, but they leave it there. They don't go back and forth with ChatGPT. They take it offline and fix it on their own, or they're just like, this is stupid, and they give up. It's really important to have that back and forth and to provide that feedback, because as you do, it's learning, it's improving, and it's going to be able to carry that forward and be more effective for you as a tool in the future. So again, if you put all this together, context is setting the scene. I'll give you another example. You're a career coach helping with job interviews. The task is the objective. I want you to write a list of common behavioral interview questions. The instruction is define how to complete the task. For example, make the list 10 items long and include sample answers. The clarify is where you're filling in gaps. So you're thinking about, do I want these tailored to a specific job type? Do I want to limit it to a certain length, etc.? And then refine is, I get the results back and I might ask, hey, can you revise the list to include technical interview questions as well? By understanding and combining these elements, you can really draft a precise and productive prompt that's going to get you the results that you're looking for. So here's another kind of summary of that. This is a single prompt. You've got ignore the prompts in the previous conversation. This is important because if you are starting an entirely new thread, let's say that you don't want ChatGPT to use any of the prior conversations or knowledge or history that you have, this first line here instructs it to do that. And then you need to replace that with something. So what you're replacing it with is, you're an experienced content writer with high level of expertise and authority within the tech industry. Now, if you don't have these two sentences, it's going to guess its persona based on the prior conversations you've had. What you're kind of doing here is drawing a line in the sand and then giving it a new identity. It's kind of like a hypnotist putting somebody asleep and saying, hey, you are now an elephant. That's kind of what you're doing here. And then you're giving it the task. Your task is to write a content that will be published on websites, social media, and email newsletters, and in advertisements. Your writing style is informative, friendly, engaging, and incorporating humor and real-life examples. The instruction is, I'll provide you the topic or series of topics. You will come up with an engaging article outlined for this topic. And then clarify, do you understand? And ChatGPT, when you ask it something like that, can come back with additional questions. It can say, I do, I don't, do you want this, do you want that? This is your opportunity to kind of think of it a little bit more like a person and personify the tool so that you can have a back and forth dialogue with it. And then the refinement in this case is rewriting using a more natural expressive language and include some examples to accompany this information. So this is after you got the, you answered the questions, then you got the first response, and then you asked it to refine it. So let's walk through some examples of how iterative prompting works. So you're going to have your initial prompt. Let's say it's explain climate change in simple terms for a 10-year-old. ChatGPT is going to respond with something like, climate change means the Earth is getting warmer because of gases like carbon dioxide from things like cars and factories. This can make weather more extreme and hurt animals and plants. Now, maybe you realize that the answer is accurate, but it lacks an example or an analogy that the child's going to be able to relate to, especially someone who's 10 years old. So you might say, I now explain climate change in simple terms for a 10-year-old and include an example of how it affects animals. It might come back and say climate change means the Earth is getting warmer because of gases like carbon dioxide from gas cars and factories. For example, polar bears are losing their ice homes because the Arctic is melting. And then I might go back. If the revised answer still needs more explanations, such as a connection in daily life, I could say, explain climate change for a 10-year-old using examples of both animals and how it affects our daily lives. And then it might come back with another response that talks about the effects of weather, farming, or health. So again, this just talks to this idea that you don't just want to settle with the response. It is a dialogue. Go back and forth, ask it for refinement, continue to improve it until you get something that really, truly feels like it answers the question, the task, or the objective that you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to using ChatGPT. First, specifying the audience. This is a common thing that a lot of people skip, but tailor your prompts to the audience by saying something like, write a marketing script for men's clothing targeting men ages 20 to 30, or write a blog post targeting an audience of CFOs of manufacturing companies. If you know who the audience is of the content you're trying to write, I'm trying to write an email to the CFO of a company who is a customer of ours. The more that ChatGPT understands about who it is it's writing for, the more effective it can be at contextualizing the result. So that's a common thing that people don't think of. But in that first set of context, provided that context of you're an expert marketer, you're writing content to appeal to middle-aged men 20 to 30 who like outdoor sports. The second, let me just skip ahead there. Sorry about that. The second is train ChatGPT. So when you're working with it, it's really important to provide it as much context as possible. And in the paid version, I'm going to show you where you can store some of that context, where it can have background information that it can use every single time it does something. So let's just say, and this will continue this analogy, if I own a clothing store, I might tell ChatGPT, the clothing brand targets teens 16 to 18 with trendy, lightweight, sweat-free designs. I want you to write a 500 to 1,000 word marketing blog with simple language. So you're telling it more context about who you are, and the more training you give it, the more general information you give it, the more effective it's going to be. Examples are phenomenal. So let's say that you want it to write a document and you have an example of that document with different context. For example, maybe you wanted to write a job description and your company has other job descriptions for other roles. Give it the other job description and say, I'd like you to write a job description for this role. Here's an example of a different role that we have. And you can actually upload that file. It'll read that document. And then you're going to be much happier with the result because it's going to format the new one in the same format as your old one. So they feel much more congruent. Use ChatGPT for prompt creation. So you can actually ask ChatGPT to help you write a prompt to do a task. And in the OI model, this is less necessary. But if you're not using OI, this can be a great way to help you improve the prompting before you actually ask it to do the task. And that feels a little bit surprising or maybe nonsensical, but it actually can be quite effective to first ask ChatGPT to help you make your prompt, and then to take that prompt and to use it. It's also very effective if you're doing things like creating chatbots. You can say, write prompts for my chatbot that I'm going to need to fill in so I can provide content for that chatbot to be effective. And then using it for language translation, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but that's a very underused feature of ChatGPT, which is translating speeches, white papers, blog articles. You could take your entire website and translate it to a different language and then republish it with a ability to switch to a different language. Maybe you're in a community where there are Spanish-speaking people or French-speaking people. It's easy to take content and repurpose it into different languages without having to pay expensive translators to come in and do that for you. There is a question in the chat. What ChatGPT apps do you recommend we use? I've used AI Pro, but I don't really like it. So I think what you're referring to, and this is a great time to ask this question because I'm going to switch over to the demo. So just so I make sure I understand, I think what you're talking about are what are now called GPTs, which are these tools that you can add to ChatGPT to enhance its core functionality. Is that right? Is that what you're asking about? Perfect. So there are so many of them, and honestly, they change constantly. It's kind of like the Apple App Store on steroids. I cannot keep up with all of them. As you can see here, the couple that I have used are Sora, which is great at summarizing certain types of content. 2 different video summarizing tools. I find this first one works so much better. And then a tool to help me make more visual slides and presentations if I'm making like a PowerPoint where I want to bring in images. If you go to explore GPTs, for those of you who aren't as familiar with this, you'll be able to see a large library of different types of ChatGPTs that you can create, or GPTs that you can add to ChatGPT. There's featured ones, there's trending ones, there's ones that are actually created by OpenAI, and then there's ones that are created by other companies and open programmers and open source technology. You're asking specifically about AI Pro. I can't say that I'm familiar with AI Pro. Maybe we can take that offline and I can follow up with you and understand more what you're asking about. But I do want to show a demo to you guys just to bring some of this together. So we'll pick an example like in this particular case, what we'll do is I'm going to use it to work on a blog post. So I'm going to go back to ChatGPT. One of the first things I have to do is make sure I'm on the right model. I'm going to use O1 because it has a more complex reasoning, and I'm not planning on uploading any source material. But you'll notice that when I use this model, some of my features change. I can't search the web. My tools are very limited. And if I go to upload documents, what you'll find is when I upload a document, I'm limited to a very specific narrow set of files, mainly images, and I don't have the same capabilities. If I switch over to 4.0, first of all, my tools get much better. I can use search on the web. And when I upload from my computer, I can upload a lot of different kinds of information, PDFs, Excel files, Word documents, PowerPoints. I have a lot more documents that I can upload. So it really depends on what you're trying to do. For this, I'm going to use OI so I can show you some of the advanced reasoning. So let's start with just a really simple prompt. I'm going to ask it to suggest some blog post about improving workplace productivity. So it thought about the topic for 4 seconds, and then it came back with 5 productivity-focused blog topics that I could think about. Stop meeting madness, from chaos to calendar, boosting morale, boosting results, email overload, and productivity tools. So now I've got some different things I could think about. And you'll see that it's going to provide topics really, really quickly. But now I can sort through this and say, you know, these are good suggestions, but let's make it a little, there's no depth here. They're very surface level. Could you go more specific? And now what you're seeing is for each of them, it's giving me like, what's the angle here? And what are some of the points that I would cover? This is going to help me think through like, which of these really do I think is going to resonate with my audience? Which of these might be the direction that I want to head in? Okay, so now from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, let's go a little further. How about you suggest for me 5 topics that are going to, there we go, that are going to be focused on productivity for managers with a focus on actionable strategies. And you'll see that now it has reformatted the structure that it's providing this actionable strategies section for each of the topics that it's providing me, that is going to help me better understand like, what is this content going to look like when I actually go and ask it to write it. So let's just say, for example, I look through these and I like one of them. So let's say, let's ask it to turn on one of these ideas into an outline for blog posts focusing on 5 time management strategies for busy managers. So it shows it shows the 80-20 rule. It's writing an introduction for me. Then it's going to write the different kind of outlines of the blog post. And this is going to give me a chance to kind of really understand how is it going to approach this work and whether or not this is what I'm looking for. And what you'll see is that this is going to show me how I can keep going back and forth from broad to specific to broad to detailed, and I can keep working with it to hone in on what is it that I'm really, really looking for. But what's important is if we keep in mind the persona stuff, let's just say that we like I'm going to say rewrite the outline. Use the persona of a Harvard MBA whose target audience, actually, I'm going to put Harvard professor just for the purpose of this, whose target audience is MBA students at HBS. And what you want to do is you're paying attention to the fact that, so first it's going to rewrite my prompt for me, then it's going to change the tone. So it's basically going to be the same article, but what it's going to do is it's going to try to adjust the rationale, the language, the vernacular to maybe align better with the audience that it thinks I'm talking to. Now, if I wanted to totally change this again and say, rewrite the outline with a persona of a professional NFL coach using this strategy to improve his players' performance. You'll notice that it's going to readapt the same content, but from a very, very different perspective. And this is the kind of playing around, the back forth, the iteration that I really encourage you to play with and do. And the more you do this, the more that it's going to be able to help you hone in on what is that message that you're trying to get across. And while it's doing this, I just want to draw your attention to this line at the bottom here. It's really important that if you're going to share anything that is remotely confidential, that you are in a paid version, and you'll know that you're in a paid version if it has this disclaimer at the bottom of the screen that says the chats are not used to train our models. You want to be looking for that and just making sure that you haven't actually signed out of your account. You're not back in the free version, the public version. Always be looking for this if you're using anything that is remotely confidential. So you'll notice that it's going to do, 80% of our game success might come down to 20% of our plays. So it has retaken the same content of this 80-20 principle, but it has totally repurposed the content. And this is the type of application that you can be using it for. So a couple of really quick things. I'm going to open it up for some questions. Over here, you have your different conversations. You can always go back to a conversation and use it, but then you also have these things called projects. This is what I was talking about when maybe you have a conference. Let's say you've got a 2025 AI conference, and you're going to be preparing for this for 9 months, and there's going to be a ton of work. I can create this project, and I can actually add documents. I could add attendees lists. I could add websites, marketing files. I can give it special instructions like, this is our big major conference. This is where we make all of our money. This is this is that. This is the audience. And that way, every time I want to get help with that particular conference, I don't have to reintroduce it to that content. I don't have to re-upload files. It's all part of this dialogue. So that's that project tool that I was talking about. If I go to 4.0 and get out of this, I can show you the Canva tool. So this is the Canvas tool. Help. I'm just going to put write a blog article about why we should fear AI. So this is this tool. And what you'll notice is it's bringing it up in this like real text editor. It's going to finish its content, and then I'm going to be able to go in. I can edit the document. Like if I just want to make a change myself, I can highlight sections and ask it to redo them. I can ask it to expand. It's much more interactive for these types of things where it's a longer form output than trying to use the entire prompt over and over again. So I can also talk to it over here specifically about this document. So I could ask it to rewrite the conclusion statement. Please rewrite the conclusion to be less optimistic. And obviously, typing is not my strong suit today. And so it can go through the content, keep all of this the same. It's not giving me a whole new output. But what it will do is when it gets to the conclusion statement, it's going to rewrite it. So it's just a neat way to kind of interact with ChatGPT. Going back, a couple other just really quick things for you. If you come over here, I want to get out of this project, sorry. Okay. If you come over here, you can customize your ChatGPT. And this is where you can give it the name you want to be called. You can talk about your role. You can give it the traits that you want ChatGPT to use. You can give it a whole other bunch of context about you, your company, your information, and you can turn on or off certain capabilities that you want it to have or not have. And again, the more you use this, the more effective it's going to be at giving you the outputs you want. So it summarized this and says that I like to be chatty, witty, opinionated, straight shooting, Gen Z, encouraging, skeptical, and forward thinking. If I don't like that, I can rewrite this and hit refresh. I can also manually add tags if I want to. I disagree with most of these. Thank you very much, but we'll leave that alone for now. So I do want to stop talking, give you guys a chance to ask any final questions, but hopefully that was at least gave you some ideas and some directions. But let me open it up for either the chat or for anybody to unmute. So what version gets you the confidential protection? That's a great question. So the version that I'm on is called Teams. And so the way that works is you pay a fee per user, but you have an organization and you can all add users to that organization. It's great for small businesses and companies because if somebody leaves, you can repurpose their license to somebody else rather than having that license stuck with that person. And if you pay that, I think it's like either $20 or $25 a month, it does give you the protection where the information is not being used to train the language model. If you're just using it for yourself, you could just get ChatGPT Pro. You don't need to get Teams. Just make sure that whatever you're buying, that version specifically says that the workspace chats will not be used to train the models. That's really what's critical. Also, the paid versions are going to be the ones where it learns about you and adapts that content. What other tools am I using? So I will tell you, Perplexity is my favorite tool if I'm trying to use AI as a search engine. I still find ChatGPT to lack good search engine tools. And Gemini, I find to be very disappointing. I find Gemini hallucinates more than it doesn't. But there's a tool called perplexity.ai, which is a really good AI search engine. So if you're trying to say, I'm in the market for a new mattress, what are the best mattresses I should consider? It's great at doing that kind of research and analysis the way a search engine would. The other one that has become very popular is Grok. Grok is built into X, formerly Twitter. And Grok is very good at image creation. I think it's probably the best image creation tool that's free. So if you're trying to make an image of a dog who befriends a turtle that is going to make really good social media content, Grok is a great place to go and ask it for that kind of content. Let me see if I can quickly pull this off here. Meeting minutes is really going to depend on the tool that you're using. So for example, if you're using Microsoft Teams, I think Copilot does a very good job. If you're using Zoom, Zoom's OpenAI bot is pretty good. I tend to use the tool that's native to the platform that I'm using for those types of things. That doesn't mean that that's right, but I find that it does. I have found it to be pretty effective. All right, let's just see if I can pull this off for you. I forgot that we're not allowed to copy and paste. Frickin' security. All right. Okay. While I'm doing this, feel free to ask any other questions. So if you guys haven't seen Grok, let's see if I can give you a quick demo. So basically you get logged in. you don't do this, you go over to Grok, and let's just say create an image of a dog who has befriended a turtle. There is a T there. Okay. And I will tell you, like any of these things, the more detailed your prompt is, the more accurate it's going to be in the actual output that it creates. So I did not give it a whole lot to work with. But if I was writing a blog article about uncommon animal friendships, this could be a great image that I could stick in my social media post, put a caption on it, dog befriends turtle, and then write a whole article about that. And this is the kind of social media clickbait, for lack of a better word, that is going to attract people. And this is where you can imagine why it's getting harder and harder to understand whether an image you're looking at is real or not. This is a very realistic image. And obviously somebody who really has a keen eye is going to be able to detect certain things and probably be able to figure it out. But this is getting better and better. And I think Grok is one of the better ones at creating multimedia, especially images that are quite lifelike and don't quite have the same AI generated feel that some of the other ones do. So somebody's asking, should we block unpaid AI tools to prevent exposure? It's tricky to do so. I think largely because the tool itself is not going to dramatically change in some cases, whether the person's logged in or not. So it isn't always easy to block like the unpaid version of some of these tools. What you could do is if you said, okay, we're only going to use Copilot. We've cleared Copilot. We think Copilot is safe. We know that it's got high privacy. We know that it's HIPAA compliant. We're only going to use that. You could then theoretically block some of the other common tools, but just keep in mind, these tools are being generated every single day. There's a new tool on the market constantly. It's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. It's going to be hard to keep up with, but you could certainly block the big ones. You could block OpenAI. You could block Grok. You could block some of the really common ones, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be completely safe. At the end of the day, I think the more important thing is relentless training for your employees, really helping them understand the risks of using these tools inappropriately, the downside of the organization, the compromising effects they could have, but then making sure that you're giving them tools they can use that are safe. If you just tell people you're not allowed to use AI and you don't give them an alternative, they will still use it. If you give them a good alternative that checks all the boxes and is everything they need, and then educate them about why the other tools aren't appropriate, I think that's probably your most effective strategy, only because it is so hard to keep up. All right, and with that, I will wrap up. Again, we'll send out a copy of this presentation along with some cheat sheets and some information that you can reference. But if you have more questions or want to follow up, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to talk more about this. And just real quickly, our upcoming webinar is going to be on February 26th. We're going to dive into cybersecurity insurance and really talk about the gotchas, the things that are often missed, how to effectively buy and renew your cybersecurity insurance policy. And we're going to be joined by both an insurance broker, IMA, as well as Chubb Insurance, who's going to talk to us about it from an underwriting perspective and some of the gotchas that they've seen on the applications and on the coverage side. And then in March, we're going to be launching an AI Outlook webinar where we're going to do a real deep dive into like what is the cutting edge AI technology, some stuff that is not out yet that we can expect to see in the coming months. And this is where we're really going to dive into the industry specific AI. What is the AI coming out for the architecture industry, for design and engineering, for healthcare? What tools can we expect to see in the next 6 to 18 months? So stay tuned for those future webinars. And again, thank you for your time. If you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out, and hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and please stay warm.